Hey everyone, Dr. Brad here, fresh back from my trip to Chicago for the Autism 1 conference. Sorry to be looking over here. I'm trying to get this video up on to my other computer so I can monitor. It's like time distortion because I'm not actually live yet, even though I'm live right now. Okay, let's see if we can pull it up here. Anyway, I have one person on, so I'm assuming I'm live, unless that's me, which is a trip. Anyway, okay, so I'm super excited to get started. Sorry for the weird intro there. My mind is still a little blown from all the awesome, there I am, awesome stuff I learned at the Autism 1 conference, cutting edge info, tons of stuff about gut health, kind of turns everything on its head about what we thought we knew about the microbiome, and illustrated how much we don't even know. Not to dissuade you, because we're going to cover a lot of awesome stuff. So today we're going to jump into some of the introductory, sort of kind of basics of what the plan is, and what we're going to be doing over these next 7 days going forward. And for those of you watching live, awesome. You're welcome to make comments, ask questions, and so forth. And those of you that are watching recorded, obviously, you can go ahead and make some comments and questions, and I'll be monitoring it so I can answer some questions later in text. But I wanted to say that also, so keep in mind that as we do these Facebook Lives, each day, if you can be there live, which I know might be challenging based on your schedule, your time zone, all that stuff, that's great, because then you'll be able to ask questions and sort of interact. But if you can't, that's okay too, because they'll be up there as Facebook Lives, so you can catch up. But I will say this. The trainings are sequential, and it's very important that they're watched in order, and it's important that to me at least, that we accomplish this class in 7 days. So a lot like when you took classes in school, there's an attendance requirement. And obviously I'm not requiring you to be here live with me, but here's how the attendance requirement is going to work. I'm going to leave the videos up for 24 hours, and then I'm going to take them down, because I want people to go with us and have a collective group experience as we go. So certainly if something comes up, let me know, and I can give you access, or even leave some of the trainings up, maybe a little longer. But that's really my goal. I want to both encourage and kind of shove you along a little bit to really be here each day, to take in the info, to learn the stuff with us, and so we can move as a collective together, and make a difference, allow for our families to be healthier, our kids to be healthier, and allow you guys, or get you guys, to be part of my mission, which is to help make the next generation the best generation, and to create a legacy for wellness going forward. So I'm kind of babbling on here on purpose a little bit, because I want to give some time for people to show up. We're starting to get a few people jumping on here now. So I'm thinking maybe we'll jump in. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and we'll jump into the materials. So here we go. Where am I? Oh, yeah. Okay. So, Gut Health 101, we're kicking it off here. So day one, introduction and setting the stage. So here's the 7-day challenge. And this is, like I've been saying, it's kind of a challenge for me as much as it is to you guys. But here's what you will gain from our 7 days. This is my challenge to me, that you all will gain this. So you'll understand how the digestive system works. You'll know what leaky gut and dysbiosis are. You'll gain awareness of the profound effects that they have on our health expression. You'll be able to identify if this, meaning leaky gut and dysbiosis, are likely going on in you and your family, leading to your symptoms. And you'll be able to create a plan to correct the problem and to finally heal. So this is kind of the overview of our agenda. We're going to cover the digestive system and its function. That's going to be a lot of what we do today, so we can lay the foundation so that as we move along, you understand what we're talking about, the different structures. We're going to go a little deep into this, so it should be interesting, because it's what's going on in your body. And I think that's fascinating. In fact, I was talking to some friends this morning about it. because for those of you that do know me, when I learn about something that I'm excited about and is expanding my mind, you kind of can't shut me up about it. So I've been talking to everybody since I've been back from Chicago. But how little we actually know, and I don't mean we like science, so that's true too, but how much we little, like you and me, like people, just regular, like as we go through our early life, in school and stuff, how much no one ever tells us about how our body works. I mean, I had a bachelor's degree already in geology, which, isn't biology, but it's a science. And then we started to do some of my prereqs for chiropractic school. And it wasn't until then, when I took anatomy and physiology, that I ever heard of the lymphatic system. Like, no one had ever told me that I had this whole circulatory system in my body called the lymphatic system. I was shocked. But that's just sort of an illustration of how little we really know. So we're going to cover that, the digestive system and its function. Also, this is our agenda for the 7 days. Leaky gut syndrome, dysbiosis, those are the big ones. We're going to cover the most common causes of leaky gut. We're going to talk about the gut-brain complex and the health implications of leaky gut. We're going to talk about overgrowth and undergrowth of our microbiome. It's possible to have one or the other or both. Specialized dietary approaches. We're going to cover kind of the most populars. We're going to then bring it on home, how to do it, picky eaters, etc., supplements, foods, and then other considerations when creating your plan. So, who's this guy? Some of you know me well. Some of you don't know me at all. I don't know. We have the whole range. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about me. I'm a practicing chiropractor. I practice in Tenino, Washington, which is just south of Olympia, which is that in itself, just south of Seattle, for those of you who don't know the geography of Washington. I've been in practice since 2004. I'm the creator of the internationally recognized podcast, Kids Eating Broccoli. And for those of you who've never listened, I invite you to check it out. We have some awesome stuff. It's primarily, I'd say 75% of the episodes are me interviewing other people. So not just sort of tooting my own horn about how excellent it is. Those are the awesome episodes, really. Some really cool people on there. Plus, I'll just give you a little preview. Coming in the next few weeks, I'm going to be interviewing some of the experts that I met at the Autism One conference. So there's going to be some really cool stuff coming down the road in Kids Eating Broccoli podcast. I was the featured nutrition expert on the film, The Truth About ADHD. Not released yet. Any day now. Nationally recognized as an expert on family and children's health and nutrition. And I'm a dedicated husband and father to 3 girls. There they are. They're cute, aren't they? Okay. So our digestive system. Oh, look, I'm going to move my... Oh, I can't do that. Anyway. Okay, so this picture over here is a schematic of our digestive system. So our digestive system is a continuous tube from mouth to rectum, and it's bathed in microbial life. And actually, I have to adjust this slide just a little bit since this weekend. And truthfully, our digestive system actually starts in our sinuses because those are continuous with our digestive system. So not that we eat our food through our sinuses, but we certainly get a lot of our microbial inoculation by breathing air. So you see the structures there, the big common structures. We got our stomach, and then that's kind of like that football-shaped thing in kind of upper area. Then we have our squiggly little small intestine, and then the large intestine in that darker pink. Obviously, they're labeled, so it's not like I'm telling you things you don't know or can't just read. But those are the 3 areas we're going to really concentrate on. Some of these other things are our liver. That's a big detoxification organ. It does a whole bunch of other functions in our body as well. Pancreas is a big part of our digestive enzymes, and gallbladder helps the liver and helps us digest fats. So that's what we're going to say about those 3 structures, but we're going to dive a little deeper into the other ones. But all of these organs are bathed in bacteria, and here's a close-up slide of some. So it's 100 trillion friends that you didn't know you had. Now, some of these slides I'm going to add to, you guys are going to get the cutting-edge, first-to-know information. 100 trillion friends you didn't know you had is probably quite an underestimation. Truthfully, until recently, science hasn't had an effective or a good way to measure or to know much about what's going on in our microbiome, because the vast majority of the bacteria and fungus and viruses and parasites and so forth are what's called anaerobic, meaning that they require a no oxygen environment to live. So when you do things like look at stool samples, you are seeing it after they've hit oxygen and they all die. So only recently, when we can do genetic sequencing, are we able to actually get a good look in there. So some of these numbers, like 100 trillion friends, and so on and so forth, are having to be reassessed now that we can really see what's going on. Okay, we're going to cover a couple of definitions so we can all use the same language. Microbiome is what we call the ecology or the ecosystem. It's a community created by microorganisms living in a particular. I actually borrowed this slide from a presenter this weekend who sent me the slides. So I got to give credit to Dr. New. He sent me these. All right, microbiome. That's the name of the ecosystem. The microbiota are the actual organisms that make up the system, and the metabolome is the biochemical products of the microbiome. So a lot of the functions or a lot of things that we experience as a result of having the microbiome are as actually a result of the chemical reactions that our body has with the metabolome. So here's an example. The gut has a microbiome that consists of probiotic bacteria and yeast, pathogenic bacteria and yeast, along with parasites. These ones, Clostridium and Lactobacillus, are two microbiota that inhabit the microbiome. DHPPA and benzoic acid are part of the metabolome. So that's kind of a sentence using them all. All right, so here's some basics. There are multiple distinct microbiomes in the human body. And actually, truthfully, the more we study the human body and start looking for them, the more we find them everywhere. And in fact, this weekend, I learned for the first time that our brain has a microbiome, a whole bunch of other stuff. So there are about 100 trillion bacteria in the human gut with at least 1,000 distinct species. And new studies are telling us that might be as many as actually 40,000 different species. These ones here, which I'm not going to try to pronounce, dominate our bacteria. And here are some other ones: bacteroidetes, vermiculites, so on and so forth, proteobacteria. And those are considered to be the probiotics or the beneficial bacteria, but that's not the big amount. We actually have more of what's called opportunistic pathogens or opportunistic bacteria in our gut, and that's where we get that 40,000 from. And that's just the bacteria. We have far more than that in terms of fungus, and even far more than that in terms of viral strains in there. So it is a teeming area of life with bacteria, fungus, viruses, and parasites. All right, this diagram here talks about those three organs we're going to talk about today: stomach, small intestine, and colon. And what it's showing us is how much bacteria there is and a little bit about what goes on. So our stomach, and it's an acidic environment, that's why it says acid there, is the fewest bacteria. We used to think, or science used to think, that there wasn't any there, but now we know there's about 10 to the third. So that's about 10,000 cells per milliliter of contents in the stomach. The most famous stomach bacteria is Helicobacter pylori, which has been implicated with I'm blanking on what they're called. Ulcers. Sorry. Okay. Next, we have small intestine, and that's a more basic environment. There are bile and pancreatic secretions there, so a lot of digestive enzymes happen in there. There we have 10 to the fourth, between 10 to the fourth and 10 to the sixth. What those mean, if you're not familiar with 10 to the fourth, 10 to the sixth, is basically that means 10 with 4 zeros after it, or 10 with 6 zeros after it. So 10 to the fourth is like 100,000. 10 to the sixth is 10 million. So that's how many cells per gram of contents we have in there. And so these are the most common: lactobacillus. There's gram-positive species. There's mucosal adaptive. This is where a lot of immune activity happens. And then our colon has the largest number and variety of our microbiota, 10 to the 12th cells per gram contents. And this is where a lot of the other ones you might have heard of, like bifidobacteria, there's lactobacilli there, bacteroids, enterobacteria, so on and so forth. There's a lot of metabolic activity happens here, and this is where we produce a lot of short-chain fatty acids as well. Okay, so here's a blow-up of our stomach. I don't know, that's coming out really blurry on my screen. Hopefully you see it a little better than me. So our stomach, up here in the top left corner, shows the general area is cardia. That's where the food contents, when you chew up food and swallow it, goes down your esophagus through the cardia into the body of the stomach. And then this blow up here is the cells. And not that I'm expecting you to really know all of these or understand them, but I like to look at it. I think it's interesting. So what it's showing us is there are these gastric glands and these what are called gastric pits. And so the main job in the stomach, in terms of our digestive journey, is that we chew our food, we send it to our stomach, and our stomach is a highly acidic environment. And what the high acidity does is it starts to do a chemical breakdown of all the foods. But one of the main things that happens or in terms of breakdown and digestion in the stomach is protein. So you eat a big hamburger or whatever protein you eat, and a lot of that, those bigger proteins get broken apart into smaller proteins and then peptides and then amino acids by the stomach acid. There's not a lot of absorption of nutrients that happen in the stomach. We do absorb some minerals, and we also absorb vitamin B12. That's kind of the most famous thing we absorb in the stomach. But the biggest job of the stomach is to kind of hold up the stuff that we swallowed, store it in there, and bathe it in acid, a strong acid, so that we can break down and break up all of the things like proteins. And then once that's happened enough, over here on kind of the left turn of the stomach, there's the pyloric sphincter, and that's a band of muscle that opens and closes like a little door, that once the food is broken down enough, if we have proper stomach acid and function in our stomach, it lets it out into what they're calling here the duodenum, which is the beginning of the small intestine for further digestion. So this is a picture that shows, well, it shows all three, the stomach, small and large intestine, but we're looking at it for the purpose of the small intestine. So the small intestine is interesting. It has special cells that form the lining of the intestines, and these support the absorption of nutrients and molecules into the bloodstream. And these are held together by special proteins that create what are called tight junctions. Now you can remember that because we're going to come back to tight junctions later. So all that squiggly looking stuff in the middle there, that's our small intestine. It's a huge long tube that allows for a lot of digestion and absorption to happen as the food travels through. And if you see around the sides, these four smaller pictures, we're going to zoom in on those guys. So this one is showing us the small intestine. That's like looking down the tube. And I think this is cool to understand the scale of what we're talking about. So the tube itself there has these different layers and so forth. And in there is the mucosa. There's a square around that. We're going to zoom in on that. And so in the mucosa, we have these folds or finger-like things that stick out into the mucosa. And you see there's the blood vessels in there and the lymph vessels. So that's where our bloodstream interacts with our food as we digest it and absorb it through these villi here. It goes directly into our bloodstream so we can, start using it for nutrition, energy, all that good stuff. So if we zoom in on one of those villi, this is what they look like. They look similar. They have the same finger-like projections in them. So it's kind of like the walls of the intestine have these finger-like projections, and then each of those has its own smaller finger-like projections, and that's what they look like. And then if you zoom in on one of those guys, you see those little cells that make up those finger-like projections, and they have their own little hairs on them called microvilli. And so that's the smallest level of to zoom in on. These are individual cells. And so you see how there's three in this picture, and that they're kind of touching each other and they're squished right next to each other. That's the tight junction. And so when we talk about leaky gut, right there is where we're talking about that tight junction that gets broken up or disturbed, and so digestion happens in a different way than it's supposed to. Okay, so this is our large intestine. So that's the next leg of the journey of our food. So it goes through the stomach, acid bath, goes through the small intestine, gets a bunch of digestive enzymes to start breaking the bigger food molecules down into their smaller constituents, amino acids and peptides. The fats get broken down, the carbohydrates to simple sugars, all that good stuff. And then it gets dumped into here, what's called the ileum, or at the end of the ileum, into the ileocecal sphincter or valve, into what's called the cecum, which is this. On the picture, it's to the left, and in our body, it's on the right side of our body, the ascending colon, because all that stuff, as it's going through and digesting, moves up, ascending. And then it takes, in this picture, which is a right turn, but in our body is a left turn to the transverse colon, and then it goes down the left side of our abdomen into the sigmoid colon because it's S-shaped. That's what sigmoid means. And then out the other side. So the function in the colon is there's, like we were talking about before, there are a ton more bacteria in the colon. So a lot of the bacterial action of digestion happens here. So we do more absorption of nutrients, of minerals, and we also, importantly, reabsorb a lot of liquids and water. I also want to just point out here, because I think it's pretty interesting, down near the ileocecal valve, I'm assuming you can see my mouse. Maybe you can't. Oh yeah, you can. There's this little yellow thing. It says it's the vermiform appendix and the mesoappendix. So our appendix, I don't want to go too far on a tangent, but I think these things are fascinating. So our appendix has long been thought of as sort of like this extra thing, right? Maybe left over from evolution, unnecessary, hangs out there, maybe has a little bit to do with the immune system. We're not sure because it can get acutely infected, and if that happens, they cut it out. But what turns out to be the use of the appendix, because if you see, there's a little hole there where it meets the colon. And it seems to be that our appendix is actually like the repository, probably not a repository, more like a nursery for our microbiome. And so what I mean by that is it seems like that's where the microbiota that we originally got exposed to as an infant or when we were being born, and then as an infant lays down its initial roots. And so if you were to be able to go through and just sterilize the rest of the intestines, just clean out all of the microbiome, that we would get re-inoculated by our appendix. So it kind of makes you think, I don't know how many of you have lost your appendix or your kids and so forth, but it's sort of an interesting thing to consider how, some of these things that medical science thinks and talks about being extra or unnecessary actually hold this important part to play, because you get illness, you get antibiotics, whatever the case may be, that wipes out some of your microbiome. If you have a healthy appendix, you can re-inoculate much more easily with your own flora and so forth. So that is our colon. Again, excuse me, it's got the vast majority of our bacteria in our microbiome in there. And however, when we start talking about leaky gut syndrome, we're actually going to be talking a lot about the small intestine, because that tends to be a lot more susceptible to the leaky gut problems. It's a lot more delicate. All right. So we've touched several times on bacteria. So this is a quick slide of that in our digestive system we have what has commonly been known as good bacteria and what has commonly been known as bad bacteria. And this is just talking about a couple of them. The most common ones that are considered good are in the Lactobacilli strain and the Bifido strain. This one right here, Escherichia coli, is actually E. coli. And we hear that and we're all worried about it. People get sick from E. coli and so on and so forth. But most strands of E. coli are actually beneficial, and they actually perform important functions. So I put this slide up here too because I wanted to start touching on what these bacteria do. They're not just like they're hanging out just because they can. They've actually co-evolved with us over the millennia to have different functions. So like the bifidobacteria, for example, they help regulate the other levels of other bacteria in the gut. They have a big interaction with our immune response for if we have pathogenic pathogens. They help with preventing tumors and they produce a lot of vitamins for us from our food. The beneficial strains of E. coli, they involve the production of vitamin K, or vitamin K2 in this case. So what this is saying is these bacteria break down some of our food that we eat even further than our own digestive cells can do, and start producing these vital nutrients for us that we wouldn't be able to have if we didn't have these bacteria in our gut. They also help keep other bacteria strains in check. And then the lactobacilli, again, vitamins and nutrients, they boost our immunity and they protect against other carcinogens, and they do that by helping us detoxify. So here's some examples of what we call bad or pathogenic. So the Campylobacter, when we have a overgrowth of these or too many of those in our system and out of balance overgrowth, we get the symptoms we look at as infection, and this is a common one in contaminated food. So food poisoning symptoms can come from that. So you leave a chicken salad sandwich out on the counter for a few days, and you eat it, and you get food poisoning. Often these are the kind of bugs that are causing that. Here's one, Enterococcus facilis, and that's we see that a lot of times. People in post-surgical infections, that one hangs out in hospitals a lot. And this one, C. difficile, and this is a challenging one for a lot of reasons. But this is a very common infection people get in hospitals also, and it resists antibiotics so well. And this says down here, following courses of antibiotics. So what happens is the antibiotics go in and wipe out most of the other stuff. And since we don't have these beneficial bacteria anymore, these C. difficile take over and cause a lot of serious health problems. All right, so when the microbiome is healthy and in proper balance, good things happen. So here's a close-up of what we were just talking about, but further digestion, absorption of nutrients, and control of their own population and diversity. So it's a teeming, healthy ecosystem when it's in good balance. So the presence of different bacteria help limit or mitigate or control the presence of other bacteria, other parasites, other fungus, and so on and so forth. So we need a good balance. And the bottom line with that is that diversity is key. So here's a couple other things about our microbiome and its interaction. And we'll dive a little deeper into some of these too as we move along. But in terms of an introductory level, your microbiome interacts directly with your mood. And in fact, over 80% of the serotonin in your body is manufactured in your gut. So if you know what serotonin is, it's considered a feel-good or feel satisfied with life neurohormone. And the common antidepressant drugs like Prozac are what are called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which means they're given with this sort of the idea that you don't have enough serotonin, so if we stop the reuptake of it, meaning the breakdown of it in our body, we'll be happier. But this sort of starts pointing at some of these interesting things that have been being found out and better known about how much of a part to play our digestive system has in our overall states of health. So with Prozac and the like, it's considered, you have a brain problem because you have this depression. But the more we study it, the more we find out about our gut bacteria and our gut microbiome, the more we understand how big a part, and maybe the majority of a part it plays in things like our mood. I mean, 80% of the serotonin is manufactured in our gut. The highest concentration of immune cells in your entire body is in the gut, and in large part mediated by the microbiome. So I like this little cartoon in part because, it's like a little funny drawings, but it also really illustrates how it works. So on the left there's the blue guy. He's a gut bacteria. He's calling the immune cell over here on the right and telling him that there's an incoming rotavirus. That's literally how it works as we've studied about how the immune function around our enteric system, meaning our digestive system, works. Literally, immune cells have little receptors, essentially, that they stick out of our gut lining into what's called the mucosal layer, which is the layer right along the lining of our gut where all the gut bacteria and funguses and viruses hang out, and it's like a probe, and it's constantly testing and measuring that layer to understand what's going on there, because our gut bacteria, our gut microbiome, is in constant awareness of what's going on in our digestive system and communicating with our immune function. So it's a huge part of our immune system, a huge part of how we stay healthy and well. So I think you're starting to get the idea of how far-reaching the implications of a problem in the gut can be. And this one just talks about some of the things. I liked this because it catches your eye. But, you see chronic fatigue, anxiety, what else? Celiac, bloating, intestinal permeability. You see lupus, candida, eczema, asthma. It's just pointing at a lot of the symptoms that we associate, or we find are at play when people have a leaky gut going on. So it goes far beyond symptomatically what we might expect with, like, indigestion or constipation or irritable bowel type stuff. Though those certainly can be a big part of it for some people. There are lots of people who have leaky gut syndrome and dysbiosis, which means a bad or a poor balance of that microbiota ecosystem, who never have a single digestive problem. They might have eczema, or they might have lupus, or they might have autoimmunity or chronic pain or anxiety, any number of things, because as we were talking about previously, how much it affects your mood, so the function of your brain, how big a part it plays with your immune function. So we're talking, in terms of autoimmune, and so on and so forth. So it has a huge implication on our overall health. And as an example, this is a photo that I snapped of a slide I saw this very weekend at the Autism One conference in Chicago. And it was so profound. So it's a research study that shows they studied all these people. And let's see, they studied 202,974 patients with depression, 14,570 with anxiety, 2,690 with psychosis, and 803,961 controls, or, respectively matched controls. And so this is a ton of people. This is a nested case control study. So they had a ton of, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people on this study. And they found that after a single course of antibiotics, we saw a 23% increase in the chance or the risk for major depressive symptoms. And we saw a 17% increase in the risk of anxiety with a single course of antibiotics. Now, with a second course or multiple courses of antibiotics, the risk of major depression goes up to 56%, and the risk of anxiety goes up to 44%. Remarkable things, And it hasn't really been that long in our history that antibiotics have been given out like candy the way they are now. And it really started kind of, at least among kids when I was a kid, that, you get sick, you go to the doctor, and they give you antibiotics because they were sort of this miracle drug that would just, solve all your problems. But I don't know, have any of you ever been to a doctor and been given a prescription of antibiotics, but told, by the way, if you take these antibiotics, they're going to help with such and, whatever, maybe, but they're going to increase your risk of major depression by 23% and your risk of anxiety by 17%. And if you've had a course of antibiotics this year already, now we're talking about you have an over 50% chance of getting a major depressive syndrome, or 44% increase in getting anxiety. That you might make some different choices, right? Not to say that there's never a use for it or never a reason. I love it. People always say that, and I'm always kind of annoyed by it, but it's really true. Like there's reasons, right? There's life-threatening infections that I'd sure as heck rather get a 50% increase of depression rather than, like a high percent of dying from the infection. But when we start looking at some of the uses, there's kids, teenagers who get put on long-course antibiotics for acne. And there's young kids who get put on round after round after round of antibiotics for ear infections. Now we know, and the American Academy of Pediatrics goes back and forth all the time with their recommendations, but one of the, they often will talk about in their recommendations how we know, the science bears out antibiotics have no benefit for ear infections, for otitis media, ear infections that kids get. And not only that, they increase the risk of future infections. So that's like one thing, right? So let's just say they don't help at all. Forget that they increase the risk. But doctors will often hand them out because maybe they'll help a little bit. But, maybe they'll help a little bit. Is that really enough to expose our kids to this increase in their likelihood of major depression and anxiety? I was stunned by this amount. I knew, about the effects that our microbiome imbalances have on our mood and on our brain function. I had no idea that multiple courses of antibiotics within a year increased your likelihood of major depression by over 50% and anxiety by 44%. I mean, it's stunning and astounding. And not to mention the drugs that we give in our culture for these conditions, major depression and anxiety, also decimate our microbiome. So you kind of get lost into that vicious cycle. Okay, so that's what I wanted to cover as our intro to our class. Let's see, in terms of my slides, I'm going to hop off the slides here real quick and bring you back to me. Yay, there I am. Okay. So I wanted to cover some of the basics. We covered our anatomy, some of the physiology, how these different structures work. It's vital to me that we kind of get a baseline, so we kind of all are on the same page when we talk about, what the stomach is, what the small intestine is, what the microbiome is. And I'm just going to share with you a couple other things real quick. Sorry, I'm trying to bring up my notes here from this weekend because I'm looking to intersperse some of these awesome things I learned that are really cutting edge and aren't in even the most recent books we've have been published about the microbiome that can kind of turn some of this stuff on their heads. But I'm going to share a couple take-home points first that I really got in preparation for this class. With the challenge to myself of trying to make it understandable and doable, that you guys can understand what leaky gut is, what dysbiosis is, how it all fits together, what the implications are, how to know if that's what's going on with you and what to do about it. And, some of the questions and commentary and different things I've run into are, I can't believe still, I can believe, but I'm stunned still often by how many people tell me that they have never heard about leaky gut being a possibility from their regular medical doctors. And even more than that, how parents, especially parents of kids with on the autism spectrum or Asperger's, ADHD, have brought that possibility up to their pediatrician or even GI doctors. Hey, do you think my kid has leaky gut syndrome? Do you think that it has to do with the microbiome? Do you think there's dysbiosis or things are out of balance down there? And they get dismissed completely. Like, of course not. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a brain problem. Your kid doesn't have indigestion, or if they do, that's something not related to their brain. And how all of the current research and science shows us how totally backwards that thinking is. And really, backwards is an understatement. I've actually been thinking what I'm going to do during our 7 days is one time in here at least, it might even take two, I'm going to drop some special bonus lessons in where I'm just going to basically kind of like download all of the sort of mind-blowing, paradigm-shifting stuff I learned and heard about over this last half week in Chicago at the Autism One conference, because it's all relative, not relative, it's all related and relevant, that's the word, to our course, but at kind of like the advanced level. And some of the things are just what people have observed, and how we even put that into practice is sort of still out on the periphery. But I think it's fascinating. I think a lot of you guys would be really interested in hearing about it. So we'll be doing that down the road. I'll let you know when that's coming. Which reminds me, by the way, for those of you that haven't put your email into the email capture, I put a post in the group that had a link. It takes you to a page where you just put your name and email in and hit go. That way we make an email list so I can email you when there's updates, changes. There'll be a couple times where I have materials to email to you. And also for these special bonus classes I'm going to do, I'll be able to shoot out a note and say, hey, we're going to be doing that in an hour, or we're going to do that tomorrow. So make sure you do that. I will go back in once this video is done and comment with that link again on this video. So look for it in the comments from me in this video. Follow the link, get your email on the list so you can get all the stuff so you don't miss anything. And then, some of the other things I ran into along the way are the idea that a lot of parents are like, this makes a lot of sense. What I've read about leaky gut, what I've heard you talking about leaky gut, I see some of that stuff in my kid, but I don't know, because we eat, we've already changed our diet. We already eat a healthy diet. We've already gone gluten-free and casein-free. We already eat organic. We already limit sugar. So how does that relate? So we're going to cover some of that stuff in our class. Obviously, I'm going to cover the idea that it might be too hard to know, because we're going to really, boil leaky gut and dysbiosis down to understandable products or concepts. And then there was one other thing that I wanted to tell you guys about before we get off for today. So we covered gut health intro. We covered the anatomy of the digestive system. I talked about some of the questions or concerns people have that their doctors say that there's really no such. Oh yeah, and that's the other thing. Not just when people have told me that some of their doctors say, oh, it's not a gut problem. Lots of them will tell you that there's really no such thing as leaky gut, which is remarkable to me. Or that gut health has no effect on behavior, which I think is such a silly thing because, and we hear this from sort of the psychiatry side of things, like, well, it's a brain problem. It's not a gut problem. I mean, nothing in your gut could possibly affect your brain. But let me give you a prescription for a drug that you're going to swallow and digest in your digestive system that's going to release chemicals that are going to affect your brain. Right? I mean, it's kind of like crazy. So that's the deal. Hopefully this was enlightening. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. We'll definitely get sciencey with some of the other ones. This is probably the most in sort of basic anatomy, physiology, sciences of any of our classes. But again, we all have to be on the same page, to start on the same page, to go forward together. So I'm going to leave this training up if you missed part of it or if you're just catching the end of it until tomorrow about this same time. So you can watch it again. Let's see, I got a comment down here. Oh, I got several comments. I have to look on my other computer here. Yes, there are a bunch of them. Some of these, I'm going to go back because my computer for some reason is only giving me, it's not telling me any of the comments. That's crazy. Okay, so let's look on our other one. It's not telling me all the comments. I guess they're coming in as they're live. Georgina, can you email fact sheets? Yes. Get on the email list, and we'll start sending out some of those emails as needed. Thank you. You're welcome. So some of these comments, for some reason, my feed is not showing me all of them. So I'm going to get that worked out before we do our next lesson tomorrow. But also, I'll go back in here after I get off the feed and answer these questions live. And then, like I said, for any of you who aren't watching it live right now, you're watching the recording, type your questions in there. I'll keep checking on it and go back and answer anything in there. And I think that wraps it up for today. So I appreciate you guys so much for not just being here today, but for signing up for this class, for endeavoring to learn more about your own health, more about how you can help your family, your kids. I had such a profound multitude of experiences this last half week at the Autism One conference. I'm still swimming in the quantity of information that I learned and was exposed to. There were parents, quite a number of parents there in general, and then quite another number of parents there who had their kids who had autism and were on the spectrum and ADHD and different chronic illnesses. And, it really sort of touched me and just emphasized what's going on, the magnitude of the situation we're in as a culture with the health of our children, and re-energized me on my mission of reaching 20 million families worldwide and really working to make the next generation the best generation. Because if we don't do that, if each one of us doesn't do that in our own way, whatever way that is for you, whether that's with your kid, your family, whether that's getting the word out, whatever the case may be, things are going the other direction. So we have to do our parts. So I thank you. I appreciate you for being on. Those of you that were on live with me for the first one, awesome. Good job. We'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow is Wednesday. I think we'll be back on around the same time. I will let you know once I know exactly when we're going to be on, so you can be there live with me. And I'll do a better job of catching the questions live. I got to figure out why that wasn't coming up on my screen over here. So you guys take care, and I'm signing off.